Check. Hello. Hi. Good afternoon. Did everybody have a delicious lunch? Vancouver's a great city to eat food in. I like food. Do you like food? My name is Jory Burson, and I'm the standards liaison for Bocoup, but I also like to spend a lot of time working on helping people collaborate and connect.
Technology. Hi, Tracy Hinds. I'm on the community committee director for Node Foundation. A lot of my community work, I think, has been in helping hammer out how people communicate with one another or don't in open source and on GitHub and in person when we're trying to work through really tough things. I think we've both made a bit of a hobby, or if not career, off of doing that. And we're excited for y'all to be here today to get to hone these skills a bit more.
So this is also kind of an extension of conversations we started at this event last year around how can we help people sort of reduce the burden of maintaining software, especially maintaining software in an open source community as part of a group of people. Coming away from the conference, coming away from that conversation, I started, and I know Tracy did too, thinking about what are some tools that we can start to provide people that give folks some techniques and tips and tricks to have better conversations and so on and so forth. So this is what we're going to cover today in a nutshell. It's going to be pretty interactive, and so we're going to be doing a lot of workshops. We don't really need our laptops or anything, and so if we could really quick, Tracy, did you remember to bring the markers?
I mean, I thought you told me you were going to do it.
No, I thought that you had that. I thought I sent that email and you were going to bring them because they're really critical.
Yeah,
No.
I just didn't, yeah.
Oh, God. Can't count on you for anything. Okay, obviously that's a joke. But, we
get to deal with this all the time, right? We get to observe this. We get to be a part of it.
How did that make you feel, just to watch a conversation that's like that?
Yeah.
Awkward, really awkward, uncomfortable. But how many folks have had those conversations before? Right. And you don't feel good, and your conversational partner doesn't feel very good about that, and anybody who witnessed that conversation also doesn't feel good. So these are some reasons why, maybe improvements here.
Yeah, and it doesn't help us get this presentation or the workshop done by all getting to sit and awkwardly feel the argument happening. So in GitHub, I think we see this quite a bit too, is we're just trying to get stuff done and we want to enjoy what we're doing while we're doing it. And we had to go there, so let's try and learn how not to.
Exactly, and so that's what we're going to cover today. A couple of different techniques that I've been using for quite some time, and Tracy has as well, to great effect. It's going to require a lot of participation and getting to know folks. So to that end, we actually want you all to come forward a little bit, because part of this is about getting into groups and stuff. So if we can go ahead and get folks in. I'm so sorry, I should have maybe made you do that when you came in, but if you want to come move up.
Do we want to, should I do the sticky notes now?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for doing that. I realize it's kind of change is hard, including changing your seat once you've gotten comfortable. So this is what we're going to be doing, and as you guys get resettled, Tracy's just going to be passing out my newly acquired Post-its, and we'll start talking about communication. What is communication? Well, communication is a dynamic thing. We're going to actually talk about a definition of communication here in just a second. But it's a pretty critical skill, right? You need it for job satisfaction, for career progression. You know, these are often requirements. So investing in developing these skills along with your technical skills is pretty smart if you're thinking about making a move. That said, communication is like one of those things. It's like the most difficult thing because we all have different preferences. Do you personally find yourself having a preference for one form of communication over another? Yeah? Who prefers getting written messages to face-to-face? Okay, great. Who would rather get in a room with somebody and have a chat? Cool. And then in those means, you probably folks who prefer written. Do you prefer getting an email or do you prefer getting it on Slack? Slack. As everybody basically likes Slack. Email's dead. Yeah. So point being, everybody has their own personal preference, and that's neither good nor bad. It just is, and it's good to take note of that. We're going to talk about applying the techniques that we'll share here in just a second to those mediums. So, all right. Definition of communication. So this gentleman back in the 1940s did quite a lot of research in communication, and granted, this is a period of time when we're really interested in understanding how people communicate, how they like to receive messages, because you know, this is also right during like the advertising and marketing kind of boom. But he determines that in the most simplest form, communication is who says what, to whom, in what channel, with what effect. And this is a super old definition of communication that has withstood the test of time, that is also pretty cool because it looks like a algorithm. It looks like a protocol, right, that we can take and get a little bit more intentional. So I like to think of this particular definition as a tool for thinking very intentionally about how we communicate. And you know, we often know in many cases when we're thinking about our communication, maybe one or two inputs. We might know what effect we want to have on people, and we might know who needs to say it, but the other variables are open for you know, you to decide based on your preferences or what you think is going to be most effective. I also find this model to be pretty great for doing post-mortem and post-communication analysis. So, you know, like how did this go? What variable could have changed to make it a little bit better? And so that's going to be basically our first. We're going to break this down, and then that'll be our first exercises for today. So, the first variable of the model is who. So this is obviously the messenger. It can be a person. It can be an affiliated group of folks, like a project or something like that, or maybe it's a whole company. And when you're evaluating who, some things to consider are there are often power dynamics in that. If it's say you have the same message, but it's being delivered by the VP or the CEO versus you know, somebody on a team, maybe the message changes in a way. Maybe there's a credibility component to it. The domain authority. So if the person is a dentist and they're speaking about tooth care, I don't know why I picked this as an example, but brushing my teeth, I suppose, versus me telling you about tooth care, like maybe that's going to change how you, the effect that the message has on you. And again, perceived credibility is another piece of the who puzzle. As you're evaluating a message and who's sending you that message, whether you realize it or not, these are things that are going through your head.
Yeah, especially because you can end up assuming that someone is a domain authority in something and end up sort of giving them power or giving them the status when, especially in open source and a lot of the work that we're doing, that's not the way things work in order for us to get work done. So that can end up being a blocker by accident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So next channel to evaluate is what is the message, what is it actually, and what context is it being delivered in? So you're doing, content analysis on how long is the message, what format is it coming in? Is it coming in sort of like a paragraph of text? Is it coming via, like an essay or something like that? You are also evaluating nonverbal context, right? Like if somebody's saying one thing, but their body language is telling you another, or there's something about the delivery of a message that doesn't suit your expectations or the expectations of your intended audience, that can change the effect. So this has a big language and cultural context as well. Maybe something means one thing in one culture, but an entirely different thing in another. So,
yeah, I think a good example for us in Node is that we were just recently having a conversation around the medium that messages get delivered in. And so if something was sent via an email instead of posted to a GitHub issue, there was an assumed privacy tag set to that when somebody had just accidentally sent an email not thinking that they could just file a GitHub issue. So you can end up having that was misconstrued as a nonverbal form of communication of someone being passive and not wanting to communicate in a proper medium.
And that was just a mistake.
Yeah, just a mistake.
Yeah. Then third variable to evaluate, who is the message intended for? So, this can be just a single person. It could be yourself. It could be a group of people. Just who is it that you're trying to talk to? A class of folks. Sometimes we know who we're trying to reach and sometimes we don't. And that's, you should consider that. Do you actually know your target audience because you've worked with them very closely, or is this a case where you're trying to reach new people that you don't know? What's your relationship with that audience? Are you trusted kind of part of their community already, or are you just trying to get started getting to know them? What do they care about? Who are these folks? It's a very obviously critical thing to consider, especially in open source. Yeah. Who are your users? What channel is the message in? So the theorist Marshall McLuhan has this famous phrase, the medium is the message, about basically how the medium that the message is delivered in can become part of the message itself, and that's something to bear in mind. So again, sometimes we have our preferences. Some folks like the verbal and some folks like the written. If somebody who usually works with you in a written context suddenly is requesting an in-person meeting, you might go, snap, this is a problem. But maybe it's not. So the channel can tell a story about the message, whether you intend that or not. And the differences in those channels can vary depending on, the message itself. So the medium ends up getting embedded in the message, and it may convey some kind of relationship which influences how that message is perceived. So
yeah, good example of this is Twitter. So while it can be a great way to share news, it is not a great back and forth having actual genuine conversation medium. So if people take to Twitter because they're frustrated about something, you're sort of shouting into an abyss. So something in Node that we had to get a grasp on was, how do we get folks expressing what they need to share and talk about in a medium that makes it so that we can actually help? And Twitter was not it.
Yeah, Twitter as a channel is very ephemeral. It's so it's maybe not the best place if you have something of substance to share. You're not going to maybe invite people to your wedding via Twitter, for example. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, is the effect. And this is your outcome. It can be something that, there's two kind of versions of this. It's an intended effect that you may have in mind. I want this outcome, or it may be an observed effect. Given some set of communication, you observed a specific outcome. So it ends up being the uncontrolled variable. It's the thing that we are evaluating to determine if the message that we intended to convey was actually received. So your kind of success metric here might be the measurement of the delta between what you intended the outcome to be and then what you actually observed. My advice to folks is to start with the outcome that you want before you move on to planning the rest of your communication. With that in mind, now we've gone through the 5 variables, what's the model that I shared earlier? Who remembers it?
Or the person, I guess.
Or the person.
Yeah.
Lasswell, right? And the model was? Yes. Who says what to whom and what channel with what effect? Yes.
That's a very good memory.
Nailed it. I didn't post it anywhere.
We
yet,
haven't
so.
said what that means.
Okay, cool. So bearing that in mind then, what we want you to do is now get into groups of 4, because we're going to get to, and we wanted to do an icebreaker.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Let's
So
do
we'll
that.
get to the groups of 4. Yeah.
So please get into groups of 4, ideally with maybe folks that you don't already know. Because we're going to do the exercises together as groups. Yay!
And ideally, you're looking for people who don't have the same color Post-it note as you. A few of you did not get Post-it notes, so just find a group of 3 that does not have one of you. But I would say do we want people sitting like across from each other? Yeah.
You can turn around.
You can also move. We don't have to sit in these small, because we're going to be doing more participatory work than staring up at a screen. Yeah. All right. So the first thing we're going to do to get to know one another, and let's see if we've got good sets of 4. We can always combine a little more. Well, if we have 2 groups of 3, I think we're okay. Oh, do we have extras? Yeah, I think if we're good. So 3 is okay.
That's fine.
Yeah, we'll always swap one out.
It's going to be a little
Yeah. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to spend 60 seconds figuring out which group has traveled the farthest to get here. So we want you to talk as a team about where you traveled from and let us know in a minute how far you traveled. 220.
220. Yeah. Yeah, the invisible. There. Oh. All right. 60 seconds, I think, has been up. I don't actually know if 60 seconds have been up, but I want it to be up. So, Dylan's team, how far did you guys travel? 2 hours by plane.
So hours
instead of miles. Yeah. All right.
Creative. I like the creative approach of hours instead of miles. Hey.
Okay, so I heard somebody say miles and kilometers, and I was like, oh, this was a failure on our part to communicate a metric here. So.
That's true.
So yeah, so I don't think we didn't think about that. Anybody travel further than on average 2.5 hours? Is that what you said? Yeah. How far?
Ooh.
Okay, so on average that would be 9 hours. Okay. Anybody travel on average longer than that?
Travel all together? Like take your total and divide by 4.
Yeah.
Like my total travel is about by plane. So if you were in flight along with it.
Okay, all right. You guys traveled the furthest. I have some buttons, some high five buttons for you. So yeah. Okay, so now that you have gotten to know each other a little bit, that's awesome. We now want you to take a look at these types of communications. So you'll see a short description and an intended effect at the end. I want you, as a group, to diagram. We want you to diagram the who, the what, the channel, the mess, and the effect. So, for each of these items, diagram based on the model. Yes, you can diagram mentally. Yeah.
Or actually, we could say like maybe could the team split it up that way because then they're not otherwise to communicate.
Let's say 5 minutes on this, and we're gonna walk around and help.
Yeah, because I was just thinking like I wonder because they need this and then they also potentially need the things they need to be identifying. This is gonna come into account later on in our participation. We'll see.
We did sort of come to some.
I thought you were saying tattoo.
Oh,
You're like, oh, you got a tattoo.
No, I'm working on my back right now. I feel like an arm. I don't think I can handle that after my back.
Oh, you got a back piece?
I've got like, yeah. It's
Oh, dope. I didn't know that was
like
cool.
working on it though. Supposed to finish it in summer. My artist is supposed to like, hey,
Okay, time's up. What did we get for number 1? What's the who's the who?
like one of the groups like to.
Yeah, one of the groups wanna go.
Awesome.
All right, yeah, okay. Yep.
You could have been taking turns. Okay. So Jory is saying bring poster notes to herself, with the medium being post-it notes, with hopefully the effect that she will bring post-it notes to the meeting. Don't know if she did it or not. We're left in suspense.
So we've got basically an interpersonal intrapersonal, because she's talking to herself, as usual, written form of communication. Who wants to do number 2?
For number 2, we had Tracy and Adam are doing, Tracy and Adam are talking to the community committee via presentation, trying to approve their mentorship program. So Tracy and Adam are saying, please approve our mentorship program to the community committee via presentation. And I don't know if it worked. Might have worked.
We'll find out. Suspense. Okay, so we've got some interpersonal communication this time, the who being Tracy and Adam. Small group, community committee, they already know each other in some way. They're already familiar with one another. In this case, the message is, or the intended effect is, we want an approval on this mentorship program. So that's their desired effect here. And to get that desired effect, they're going to prepare and deliver a presentation, and we'll find out if it succeeds. Number 3. We'll go with this group.
Okay. So the who is NPM Inc. What is their package security product, and to whom would be the market? Which channel? We were a little unsure about this. So it's press releases via news outlets, and to what effect would be a positive awareness of the product.
Okay, so this one is actually a tricky one, because if we look at this a bit more granularly, and go down to specifically what's happening. NPM Inc., yes, it's an organization. Who are they communicating to? Tech news outlets. That's the first, another organization. Their desired effect here is not, it may in the long run be to have a better, success with the product launch, for example, but initially they want these tech news outlets to cover their, the event. And so they're doing that in a written way by sending a press release. So like, we're breaking this, yes, the long-term goal is probably let's be more successful with our product, but initially to do that, our strategic goal is let's get the tech outlets to write about it. So
Press our people too. Just being silly that like the press our people too.
the press
Yeah,
releases,
yeah.
yes, there's also. Number 4, last one. Yeah.
So we have Maggie is the who. The docs issues are the what. The whom are her team. The channel is GitHub, and the effect is so that her team can do doc sprints.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So Maggie, you said Maggie's the who, the team. Again, the entity sharing, this is the intended audience. The desired effect is to be the document and the channel of the. Okay, so next set of exercises on this front. Do you want to hit the advance button on that? Go So now we get to see what the outcome here. We now have the observed effects. She did, in fact, forget the Post-its. That's the observed effect on number 1. The committee did not take the vote on number 2. Observed effect on number 3, only one of the tech outlets covers the story. And number 4, the team doesn't do the doc sprint. So what we want you to do in this exercise is, now given the intended effect, which we discussed just prior, and the observed effect, what variables of the who, the what, the whom, and the channel were problematic? And what could you have changed? What could be changed to maybe close that delta? So let's take another 4 minutes on this. Yeah, 4 minutes.
It's not a post-it, it would be like written on my hand.
It was like 2, 3, 4. Another minute. Okay, 1 minute warning.
People always listen to Maggie.
Yeah.
I would. Yeah. Okay. I think we're gonna talk through some of our ways that we could work on our communication. So, who wants to take a hop at number 1? Oh, we got team right up front.
All right.
I'm excited to tell you that I think the channel, the community, the piece of paper on a mirror was her downfall.
I would agree with that. Yes, that seems like a very bad way to remember to do. But maybe that's bad for Jory and really effective for somebody else. What's another thing she could have done? In addition to talking in the third person, to remember to do this. What's another strategy she could have taken? Yeah. Or just go ahead and put them in your back. All right, just do it right then. Okay, don't procrastinate. Thanks, Tierney. A calendar reminder. Okay, that's a different channel that she could have used. Or put it on the door. Different location. Yep. So yeah, I would also agree that that's probably the number 1 problem with this particular message. Number 2, who wants to take number 2? What are the problematic channels in variables in number 2?
So we thought perhaps the problematic channels could be that you're presenting it to a group of people, and to get approval from a group of people is difficult. So you might lobby them individually first, or give the committee a heads up that you're going to give this presentation so that they don't have to make a decision on the spot.
That's yeah. That's fantastic. So yeah, exactly. So they could have changed from the like group to group communication to more of a more intimate communication, so it's more clear. They could have let folks know they could have sent a different message, which is, we would like for you to take a vote on this, and so we're going to give a presentation. Tracy says, yeah, probably. Yeah, maybe there was something in the presentation that didn't resonate. But, you know, yeah. Possibly that, yeah, exactly. Maybe they weren't clear, or there was some other mix up in the message. Instead of saying, maybe they're trying to say, we want you to approve this, but what the committee is hearing we want money. Yep. I think my intention was for you to assume that they did present, but they didn't take the vote. Like, yeah. So they may have presented it, but then not been clear that their outcome was, once we're done presenting, we'd like to get everybody a yes or no. So, cool.
Yeah, it's possible the part of the presentation did not indicate that they needed to vote in order for something to proceed. That happens too.
Number 3, problematic variables.
The verbal meeting with a news outlet might have been useful instead of just sending them an email. Reminder emails, in case they only sent them one, is a problematic thing. You could have also posted it on your blog instead of just relying on news outlets and social media. And other possible things is maybe they just had a really bad press release, or the product that they were releasing is really uninteresting.
Well, that's actually a great question. I don't really know.
What was the question?
How often does a news outlet actually put out a press release when you send it? Like maybe 1 out of 12 is great.
Yeah. So
I have experience. We send out a lot of press releases.
Yeah.
To tech media. We do product launches all the time, and the success rate is about 25%.
that's cool.
And the only reason it's 25% now, it used to be this is because we started, one of the clients started something providing logistics, and we started sending free cell phones.
They could have bribed. Yeah, that's funny. Oh yeah. The product.
So you're actually saying this was a success. We didn't need to do anything different.
Right.
We saved ourselves a cell phone.
But to your point, they could have made it more personal via a call somebody up who's a reporter and say, hey, we'd really love it if you covered this, instead of sending an impersonal press release. They could have done something a bit more personal. They could have added to the touch by sending a phone or a demo of the product to show that it's interesting, or done something there. So maybe it's both the message and the channel in that case. Yeah. Proxy the message through experts, sure.
Yeah, knowing how the people you're trying to communicate to best appreciate the communication.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, and number 4, who wants to take number 4? What's the problematic variables? Yo, Tier.
we started at the end and went up. Some of the problematic variables. So it was verbal, like, or one of the solutions was like a verbal kind of outreach and reminder. Another one is like pinging over Slack or whatever kind of communication medium you use. Like adding a calendar reminder to kind of meet and make sure that like this is gonna happen, and you try to like figure out any kind of barriers to it happening. Talking to people, so whether it's PMs or engineers or whoever, like making sure that this is on the radar, that we're gonna do this, and then also mention it in like your stand-up.
So it could have been that she didn't communicate directly that what she wants is a doc sprint, but instead started to organize as though they were going to do a doc sprint instead of going and having personal conversation to make sure everybody was on the same page about that. Yeah. Any other problematic variables or ideas for how this one could have been changed? Yeah. Excellent point. Like, yeah, if she's not the lead, maybe it didn't have the intended effect because it was the wrong messenger. Other lack of capacity, or so audiences may be receptive to it, but they're not like, yeah, not able to receive. Using a different tool, yeah. Waffle. Yeah, okay, all right, we're not gonna get into tools.
So I think it's like what we want to wrap up here is like, so looking at all of this, breaking these sentences or these experiences down, why do y'all think that we're focusing on breaking down essentially sentences? Yeah, and I think it helps us pause, right, to look back over what happened in a lot of circumstances where we can stop to say like, well, I wanted this outcome. Why didn't that happen? They want this outcome. Why are they saying these things? Or why are they writing it this way, which clearly communicates something different than I think that they want? And you can get to the bottom of this. So this is, I think, Lasswell's model is really great for being able to build to slow us down when we want to get to really complicated means of like understanding conflict and communication, when sometimes it's really this simple to help move things along.
Take it back to the first principles of the conversation and see what you can learn and layer on top of that. So exactly. And I think we have one more exercise on this before we move on to the next model. So let's take like another 4 minutes and we'll do a strategy. So now the new scenarios, new people, the new people are you, and that you have an objective here, that you have an intended effect that you would like to impact. So take a second and come up with your own strategies for each of these, and let's see what y'all come up with. So you can roll your own. Since he bolted, I was gonna help a little bit. Oh, we're on number. Oh, you're starting at the bottom one. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So try to avoid
Go to the.
try
Yeah.
to avoid a 0-day situation and go to the maintainer directly, and
Okay.
then figure it out. I would try and find the contact information from the repository, like in GitHub.
Okay.
Well, I guess it doesn't really specify where the source code is. It's just the project. But either way, try and reverse engineer where if it's hosted publicly, if it's as serious as it sounds, then probably not an issue unless the maintainer can fix it and publish it, and then maybe post-mortem it after you fix it.
Depending on how serious it is, I might send them an email if I can verify it's going to the right person, or I might call them. It's really serious, and so not have any like written communication about something that will potentially be something.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
And then maybe try and then in that, try and understand like what the implication of that, like it's popular, but is the change like a breaking change? Is it gonna like be easy? Is it just a patch fix for the community update, or is it part of like multiple? So this would seem very much like a direct one-to-one, just to figure out what to do.
I might also even, if I don't know who the right person is, I might like put it out into like saying I have found a vulnerability.
So make it, but make a generic message about a vulnerability so it doesn't raise any hackles.
Right.
And see if you can get the community to tell you who the right person is for the more serious message. I like that strategy. Seems very safe. Yeah. Yeah. Let me go check on a couple of other groups and.
Dealt with this a lot. Well, no. I mean, well, the first thing like I did within the organization is we made sure we were defining clearly our expectations, and that our expectations were themselves defined. Right? Like, so that way. Right. So I mean, ideally, in a perfect world, you kind of have these things figured out as part of like the hiring and recruitment process, and like you have your job description.
Okay, 1 minute warning.
They were defined. I would cross-reference where they're underperforming against how they should be.
Good ideas? Have good ideas?
No.
Yes.
Yeah, those would definitely be a one-on-one, like be delivering. Just like I'd probably start with like.
That's okay, we're swinging.
Get their situational context, and
Okay, let's call it because we still have a whole other thing to learn today. Who wants to give us a strategy or a model for the first one? Number one. A lot of folks started at the bottom, so Joe.
We thought that there would maybe be two parts to this one. The first would be you probably have some established means of communication with the person you're going to promote already, because you're unlikely to just pick some random person and surprise them. So you would probably want to reach out to them first via whatever that means of communication is and let them know, hey, I want to do this. Are you interested? And then once you've done that, you would want to also communicate to the rest of the community, in this case probably on GitHub, and that this change has been made so that people can be aware of that and it's not done in secret. But also you don't want to surprise the person by promoting them and then they show up the next day and they're like, oh, that's not what I wanted. Yeah.
Cool. Any other ideas on number one? Any other alternatives? Yeah, Dylan? not surprising them, making sure that they're on board with the plan that you would have and expectations you would have for them as a maintainer, and not just saying like, you know, congrats everybody, this person's in charge now. Number 2. Who has a good plan for number 2?
So this is going to be 25% shooting from the hip because.
Got it. Love it. Let's go.
So I think one of the first things that we latched onto is realizing that it's definitely cross-team, right? And so this is not as simple as just looking over to your immediate coworker. And so because of that, there's some probably chain of command that's necessary to follow. And so it says your team. So if you're the team lead, you probably have a little bit closer access to the ops teams, whoever maintains their backlog. And you know, the idea is to avoid tapping them on the shoulder, the ops person individual, and saying, hey, we need you to do this and need you to reprioritize it. And so that's part of it, is just, if you're the person to do that, then do that, and make sure that that message is going to someone that actually has the ability to get that onto the backlog and has an understanding of how what their current workload looks like. And then as far as the message itself, it's, you know, we can kind of default and just use Scrum Agile language, like, hey, we're blocked here. And, you know, using that, it takes a lot of the emotion out of it, and it's no longer their problem to fix. It's just simply a block, and it's just the terminology that we use.
So would you be delivering messages here in a written format? Would you, like, what channel would you ideally?
What do you guys think?
Person to person? Yeah, but this might be for each of you. This might be a different medium, but the idea is pick the right one, right? Cool. Number 3, you've got an intern. Who wants to talk about?
So obviously this is an underperforming intern, so they're probably a little bit sensitive, and it's a bit of a sensitive topic. So we basically said arrange a one-on-one over coffee and have an informal chat.
How would you feel if that, instead of saying one-on-one over coffee, what if that was feedback given in a different channel? If you emailed that, do you think it has the same impact? Yeah. Last one real quick before we move on to the next one.
We were talking about something else. Number 3, how it's really important. Like, you know, we want the spot filled, and we, in general, you know, we want people we work with to succeed. So we would have a conversation with them, but also try to be really clear about what they need to do in order to be successful. And if they're successful, then they will be hired to fill the spot later on. But also just be really clear about what they need to do.
Yeah, one addition to that, just a small thing, is that as a manager, if somebody's underperforming, just having a coffee chat do it for me. Like, you need to have clear goals that are you working towards.
Yeah, we actually don't know from this statement whether the person is aware they've been underperforming. So yeah, that's a good.
Maybe the coffee chat signals more of like, this isn't really an issue, it doesn't transmit the consequences that are at stake, where a more formal thing would. Certainly if it was written down, it might even communicate even more severity. So yeah. Okay, cool. And last one.
So depending on the seriousness of the vulnerability, if it's really severe, I might not even write an email. I might try and find someone to talk to in person in these troubled times. So don't make the PR on GitHub. Talk to someone. There's really 2 conversations to be had here and 2 things to communicate. One would be finding the person who to talk to secure this thing in a safe way, and the other is communicating it out to the rest of people, like all the production environments, to rectify it.
there might even be a third step, which is a postmortem. That could then be carried out by the maintainer after you've worked with the maintainer to solve it and it's safe. Close it out with postmortem.
Yeah, an interesting thing here is that if the popular open source project hasn't done a great job of communicating what you should be doing when they have serious security vulnerabilities, then they're also hampering your ability to communicate with them.
Lasswell model. And so when can you use it? Again, I'd love for you to use it to plan your communication, to strategize a little bit if you know what you want, you know the outcome, or if you're just about to go, shoot from the hip, maybe stop for a second and say, oh, what do I want? What is my intended outcome? Let's take a second and plan the rest of the variables out. To diagnose your comms, maybe in a retrospective or something like that. Go, okay, well, we wanted X and we got Y. Where in our communication could we have changed different variables to get a better result? Lastly, you can also use it to start strategizing patterns to repeat common types of communication for improvement. So if you know that you regularly have like poor results from, say, planning meetings or something of the sort, and you can strategize a better communication model for your team that gets repeated, think about that, using that as a template for the whole team so everybody knows exactly what to expect. So that's Lasswell, and now we're going to talk about a different technique, or set of techniques, called Kanter Models, which, Tracy, do you want to talk about these?
Sure. So David Kanter is an awesome organizational psychologist who had worked with family systems. And if you haven't looked into systems thinking from a human perspective, I recommend it. I think it's something really cool that you get to see sort of the comparison of how that's been applied in like computer science and software development versus humans. But it's a whole branch of psychology that's very interesting. Whether it's family systems or how we operate together in the workplace and organizational psychology. So the idea here is sort of, I think, a little bit of a ramp up from where we were working with Lasswell, is identifying these types of communication roles that we tend to play. And we'll really focus on that with the actions. But there's actions, domains, and structures. We're going to go through what each of those means. But it's sort of roles and the lens then that each of us are seeing through or behaving through as part of us communicating with one another. And it's really interesting to get to see how these patterns emerge in reading the book, Reading the Room, which is David Kanter's famous tales of how he's applied this work over decades. You'll get to see a lot about how you work yourself and how you can end up getting stuck in particular roles. So it's a really fun thing. Starting with actions, I think it's this. I love that you've done this in a way that we can identify it pretty easily. So the first of the actions is move, or the mover. So it's someone who tends to initiate action or keep things moving along, sometimes forcefully. They're going to say, like, let's merge this PR. Okay, let's do that. And then there's someone else who is the follower. And it doesn't mean that they're a follower all the time. It's just in this particular circumstance. And they tend to support actions. And that's like, okay, cool, looks good to me. I'm not going to fight you on it. And then we have the opposer, which challenges the action. No, it doesn't follow our coding conventions. Sometimes not helpful, sometimes it's blocking, sometimes it's a good push. And then there's the bystander. And the bystander bridges action. I'll make the changes, then we'll merge the PR. Sometimes the bystander will kind of remind you of some context or history that will help the other roles steer or maybe even change how they're operating. So the idea here is that any of these roles can be, think of this as 4 different people. This could be 2 people who are, ebbing and flowing between, moving and following or opposing or bystanding. You can technically be 1 person and doing all of these things. So, yeah. So I guess I would say, like, think about how you tend to operate when you need to get something done, let's say in a GitHub issue or a PR has been posted. What tends to be your type of action or role when you're in this situation? Does anybody want to call themselves out?
Most of the time, looks good to me, thumbs up, fine.
And somehow in recent years, I've become, I used to be that, I've become a mover. I was like, can we please just do this? Like, let's get this done.
It's the point is it's also to Tracy's point, something that actions are things that we each individually rotate through in any given conversation. We may start the conversation with an initiation move, and end the conversation bystanding with a bystanding move or a follow or something like that. These are not pejorative, unchangeable positions, and we'll talk about look at that here in a little bit further depth.
Yeah, and I think so. Some things to note about these folks, right? Without movers, there's no direction. Without followers, nothing gets completed because you've got these other positions who are potentially opposing. Without opponents, nothing is being corrected. And with bystanders, oh no, my bad. With bystanders, you're potentially not getting the context you need in order to make these decisions. So it's important to notice with this model that all of these things, it's almost like when people say conflict is a healthy thing, but it's how you approach it. You don't want to be stuck in any one of these roles. You need these different roles to come to a healthy conclusion. All right.
Okay, so we are going to have a conversation, and so does this all sound crystal clear as mud, as I like to say, what the actions are? Kind of, yeah, okay, perfect. And no questions, good. Because now we're going to share a conversation, and we want you all to identify what the action is. Where's our unicorns?
Oh yeah.
Unicorns. Unicorns.
There you go. Is this it?
Yeah, I think so. All right.
Oh, that was the other one. Hold on. Oh no. Oh, I didn't move it. Sorry. Let's see. Sorry. Jeez, Tracy. God. Okay. Oh. Do you want me to put that up on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just put that up on. Oh, it's not going to show, is it?
No. And also, you have the answers in there. That's okay. Well, I'll just say it, and then they can.
Okay.
They can okay. So let's add some unicorns to JavaScript, because unicorns in JavaScript are the most magical thing ever. What's that?
Here, I'll read another one.
Yep.
Teaching how to implement unicorns in JavaScript is going to be incredibly difficult because it's magical syntactic sugar. So we'll be in real trouble if we implement unicorns in JavaScript. I'm sorry.
Great. I agree with the arguments you've made. Unicorns in JavaScript should definitely be our prioritized feature in the next release.
Yeah. We tried some of these same ideas 2 years ago, and they didn't work. What do we think has changed?
And do another one?
Yeah.
Who wants to read our silly? Who else wants to read one? So we don't have to, let's go with this one. Example 2.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna take Oh, actually, no. Someone worked really hard on that code for a JS library. It's their like 17th time contributing to open source. And oh wait, this is wrong one. Sorry.
Oh, that's just giving the context.
Yeah, that's
no,
the
you're
context.
good.
All right, let's skip ahead to the next thing.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna skip ahead. We're gonna skip ahead because we apparently didn't plan our script, and also we're running short on time. I just looked at that too. So instead of us reading silly scripts about unicorns to you, which is amazing, but also maybe not worth your while, we're gonna have you get in your groups, and we want you to act out a role. You act out a role. So pick mover, have a poser, and so remember when Jory forgot the Post-its earlier? She was supposed to bring these different colored Post-its, and then we didn't get enough different colored Post-its. So now just sort of appoint someone in your group to be a mover, someone in your group to be a poser, someone in your group to be a follower, and somebody in your group to be a bystander. And we want you to have a conversation about why your organization should adopt Node.js, and please stick to your role. So movers stay movers throughout the conversation. Followers stay followers. Bystanders stay bystanders. Opposers stay opposers. Okay.
And just try that with one round. You don't have to go too far down that rabbit hole. But let's just try.
Just try a little bit. It'll be a challenge, but stay in your action role. Do you guys want us to switch back to the slides so you can have more inspo? Yeah. Okay. Let's take like 2-3 minutes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think the last one went really well. I didn't realize how far over we went on time.
Yeah, we're like.
I think I missed I had written somewhere in there. I was like, oh, watch for time, and I'm wondering if I put it too far down.
Well,
Oh. Oh, you're fine. I also wrote it like a play, so that piece was the like lead up to them saying it's a racist mistake. So it's like, what do they call that in like playwriting? It's like the background. Like it's not the like what the actors would read, but it's the like prep for the scene. Yeah.
All right, how is this going so far? How are your conversations? Are they productive? Short, one-sided? Who wants to share their conversation with the group?
We had some good ones.
I mean, who wants to? You guys are looking. Oh,
they're giggly.
Okay. Yeah, share your conversation.
Well, the opposition at this conference is really thin. So yeah, we're refactoring.
Are we supposed to just redo the whole conversation?
Yeah.
Great. All right.
yeah.
Hey, we should all switch to moving our entire code base onto Node.
But PHP is so awesome.
I'll get started refactoring today.
This is a very bad idea.
it's pretty ridiculous, right? To try and stay in, it's not natural, also, right? To stay in a role. Did it feel right to you guys? No. So try having the same conversation again, but now just or a different conversation if there's one that you feel is more like practical and tactical to you. But and now do it switching roles. So now instead of trying to stay a mover, try and get someplace that's a bit more like productive.
My immediate instinct is to want to ask why. I'm not sure which. I'm not opposed to it.
So that's actually a bystand. That would be a bystander. Yeah. Yeah. Because you're bridging. Somebody's asked a thing, asked for a movement and action, and you're not opposing or following directly. You're just asking for more information so that you can either bridge to another action or follow or oppose.
Yeah. I dig it. He's searching for meaning.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I feel like some people here would just like to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're
playing to the crowd. Yeah, what happens if everyone is just like, good?
Yeah. So this will be a great result. We can report back to, like the LF that like, we got everybody to.
That's how you get a BDFL.
Right. That's it. Yep. So it's sometimes easy to think about bystanders as like consensus builders or something because that's often a bridging action to try and build consensus. But it's also an action you can take if you need more information because you're not in a position to agree to follow or to say outright that you oppose the action. So you can think about it like that way. Right, or you're trying to create a potential third option if you've got a yes and a no, but there's actually room for a maybe in between. A bystander can be somebody who's presenting some logic as to why there might be a new action to introduce, or a new move.
So two questions. A, what's a consensus builder? I'm not entirely there. And B, if the opposing person says, oh no, it doesn't follow putting conventions, and then asks something, tries to lead it somewhere,
That's two actions. You can take two actions, and yeah. So right, exactly. So in this case, we might say no. So oppose because, and I'm going to give you a bit more information because I'm not a total jackass. Here's another option, or let me ask a question, or let me propose a different action. So those are things that can happen within the same sentence, essentially, and within the same person.
So what I'm understanding now is in reality, purely opposing is not constructive.
Oh no, yeah, definitely not.
Unless there's always some other people who are operating in the other roles. Okay, that's also right.
Yeah. And then on the flip side, purely following is not constructive there, is it?
Nope. Because it's the point of the first action is also to illustrate that staying in the same action all of the time is not really healthy for good communication within a team.
Yeah, what if everyone follows except for one person? What if one person is doing all the moving? That person's likely getting what they want.
What if you're always moving? Maybe that's actually taking a psychological toll on you because you feel like you always have to be the initiator, or you feel like you always have to be the opposer, or you feel like always. So it's not All right. So, how are these conversations going about? How are these conversations about Node going? You changed topics? Yeah, yeah, you're okay. Yeah, okay, yeah. You know, that's the danger with these examples. Did it feel more natural to be able to switch between the actions? Did you find yourselves staying in one or leaning toward one action? Yeah. So a lot of times in our day-to-day communication, we do tend to default to an action, and it may just be because that's where we're comfortable, maybe because that's how the team dynamic has been created. As Tracy mentioned, she's been feeling like she has to do a lot more initiating lately. Or maybe you feel like there's a lot of tension on your team, and the best thing for you to do is just follow, just to, get shit done, as they say. Can you cuss on the mic here? I don't know. I should. It's like, yeah. So, okay. I was gonna say I apologize for that. Yeah. So a bit of history about the model itself. He created this model out of years of observing conversations in teams. His job as an organizational psychologist is to go in and diagnose what's happening in groups, why are things getting to the state that they are, and through that process, he identified in a communication that these four roles actions exist. Kanter would probably argue that you need all four to really have healthy dialogue, but I don't think that in a small conversation it's necessarily a bad thing if you don't hit all four. But the problems start to show up when you have an over-reliance on one type of action versus another.
Yeah, and I would say especially because this is not in isolation, right? Kanter studied people in family systems and in organizations. So it was always people were sort of stuck together, right? Like they're gonna keep having interactions with one another, and what are the patterns that are emerging? So you may not need a bystander in some conversations. It may not be helpful to have a mover depending on the conversation that you're having or the thing that needs that you're discussing or communicating. I think even below, we mentioned a little bit like what level of stakes are you talking about? How quickly does something need to be decided? A lot of that comes into play into whether, right? Like I would say, like we were just talking with this group here saying, what happens if you have a group of people where everyone's followers and there's one mover? The mover is very likely to get what they want. And I made a joke that that's how you get a BDFL. So there are circumstances where it's helpful because no one else, may have the energy or the context to be able to move those things along. But ideally, you would want to have some opposition and bystanding in order to best direct, the decision making to an informed decision. If that's the case, there's other circumstances where the best possible thing could be to oppose and block something from happening.
Another kind of point to draw out here is that these actions can be combined. You can very easily flow from an oppose to a bystand and propose a new action, right? In our example here, we have somebody who has opposed the action of merging the PR with a no. They've provided a little bit more information about why they feel that way, so they're not a complete jerk for just being like, no. It doesn't follow our coding conventions. They could say, I'll make the changes and then merge the PR, which is a bystand move. Like, I'm opposing your first idea, giving you some context, and now I'm proposing a second action that may be unacceptable for someone to take, and then their partner can say, "Looks good. That's great. Perfect. Works for me." So let's take a look at some, since we are interested in these problematic patterns, things that can arise. So pattern number one, maybe everybody in the group, or all of the participants in the conversation, everybody's trying to move. What outcome are we going to get there? What? 4 outcomes.
Yeah.
4 different outcomes, possibly. What do you see going wrong with this? No, maybe there's no follow through on something. No sanity checks. Maybe 4 outcomes, 4 different sets of expectations, 4 different ideas of what good or done looks like. What? No context?
Yeah.
Have you ever been in a situation where this has occurred? Yeah. Nightmare, huh? So now that you recognize maybe what a move looks like, maybe you can see this happening live, because one of the ideas behind the Kanter Models here is a real-time tool. So if you understand that that's what's happening in the moment, you're getting move, 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 move. Take a second and go, hey, you know what? I think that we might not all be on the same page. Sounds like we might all be heading in different directions. Can we regroup really quick? Courteous compliance. What did you call this the other day? I called it Midwest nice because I'm from the Midwest.
Oh yeah, I called it the Jewish mother-in-law. Like that was.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So Midwest nice. So moves are only ever followed. Like maybe the pattern is you've got one actor, or maybe you're the actor in this case in the communication, and you're just getting a bunch of follows. What does that look like? What does that feel like? I think that's a good way to summarize it. Potentially no accountability if it's maybe moves that shouldn't be taken.
You're kind of stifled too. Like, are you getting good ideas? People are just yesing.
Yeah, they're surrounded by yes persons. Not a good situation. Point counterpoint. Move oppose. Move oppose. Does this ever happen in tech? Yes. No. Yes. So what happen? What starts to happen? We're building up a lot of tension in this type of conversation, because if this pattern repeats long enough, then is stuff getting done?
Yeah, you're spending a lot of energy just communicating instead of potentially doing the thing that you're communicating about.
Yeah, and that's like. And then another awful pattern is covert opposition. So maybe what appears to be a follow, somebody is following, but they actually are opposing, and they're not using the right language to present an opposition, or they're bystanding when they also actually oppose. And this one's pretty dangerous, I think. Anybody experienced this before? Yeah. So we're all really familiar with these patterns, whether we've recognized them yet or not. And the idea is, now that you know a little bit about the roles that we take and the actions that we take in a given communication, you can spot whether you're in a healthy pattern because you're using a nice balance of all of the different roles in the communication, and that's a productive pattern for you and your team, or whether you're getting stuck in a move oppose, or you're moving in a bunch of different directions, and you can take that information and circle your team back up and maybe propose a different pattern. Sometimes you can even call this out in a productive way. I've noticed that we're actually stuck in a pattern that seems like we are all moving in different directions. what can we do about changing that? So let's go take a quick look at the next domains, at the next model. You want to talk about domains? Or you want me to?
I'm going to hit systems. I'm going to circle back on that if we get to systems with the other diagrams.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So another model that Kanter presents is a domains model, and this is another way of looking at how a person is communicating based on sort of like where they might be coming from in a given moment. So some folks tend to, and another note on this, specifically, unlike actions where we often are individually going through each kind of action on a regular basis, in domains we tend to have one that we stay in more than the other. So some of us are more affect-driven in most cases. Some of us are more power-driven in most cases. Some of us are more meaning-driven in most cases. Again, not a pejorative thing or anything of that sort, but just a sort of a preference. Folks who like to communicate in affect tend to value feeling and connection with others. They might be really concerned about how other people feel. So in our example here, we have somebody saying, I think that we should do this because this other person might feel more connected if we do it. Or you might hear somebody describe, give some reasoning to say something along the lines of, look, I feel like this is the right thing to do, and they may give a few really great reasons why, but they're using that language of feeling, of connection, of kind of connecting with that sort of physiological state, if you will. In power, we're talking about values of completion and success, getting stuff done, because that's really what we're looking for. So in our example here, we're saying that we need we're valuing complete coverage, so we shouldn't do this action unless we have, unless the PR has tests. So that would sort of challenge, like, there's some data points here, but it's about this, the underlying value here is about completion. And then meaning, this is a person who often likes to communicate via data points. So one of the challenges with this, of course, is that it's often not clear if, like, what this person might be, outcome this person really might be trying to achieve, because they present a lot with data. This is actually my problem a lot of times. Somebody will ask me a question and I'll give them like 15 different data points, which is not a yes or no, and that was the answer they were looking for. So they might say, here's some data about the PR, and then, you know, maybe they give you the answer to the question that you were really asked. So this gets challenging when two people who tend to communicate in different domains find themselves in a pattern, like one of the patterns we were just discussing, of friction. So if you've got somebody who is an affect, tends to like to communicate in an affect domain, and they're in a move oppose with somebody who likes to communicate in a power domain, what do you think happens? You start to get maybe hurt feelings. That cycle starts to get negative because you've got somebody who's communicating about connection and that kind of thing, and they're not feeling like they're being heard in their domain language. As I mentioned, we all have preferences. I'm just curious if you, based on this right now, do you have a gut feeling of what yours might be? Affect. Totes. I feel that. Meaning? Do you feel like you have a domain that you prefer in one setting versus another? So how about at work? Maybe you use more power language at work. If you use power language at home, maybe maybe that's not so good. What about when the stakes of the conversation change? So right now we're just sort of like chatting and we're having fun and it's all fun and games. So there's that. But what if now there's a crisis? Do you think your domain changes? Absolutely. Personally, I tend to value on a regular basis. I tend to swap between affect and meaning, and bystanding as my core actions. In high stakes, power and move. Let's that's my like let's control the crisis and let's go. Other people respond to it in different ways. So let's do. I think I have one exercise on this. Nope. Yes. Did I? Yeah. Okay. So we want you guys to let's do objective 2 because we're running out of time, and the node thing I don't think is going to really generate that much excitement. I would love for you guys to get together and maybe in the interest of time just tell like one or you can tell just a high level recap of a discussion that you just had and figure out if you can identify what the primary domains that you were operating in were and whether you were taking action moves or bystanding or that sort of thing. So we're layering the models a little bit, but that helps also kind of do some more analysis. So does that make sense? Okay, so you can pick maybe, hopefully maybe a conversation you had with a team or a story about, or you can use the node conversation too.
So I'll cover these as quick as possible because I think that the examples are actually like really great things there. Okay. I kind of wanted to walk down to like these and thinking about like, well, what does this look like in a random setting versus setting like closed system which has rules which like just doesn't allow for this because you have like such a specific structure. Like it's just interesting to see like how these patterns can emerge more in like the different like a serial moves and a random system implies like extreme, no one's doing it. Right. Unless people are like super self-regulating. Which is usually rare. Yeah. Okay, so we will I just wanted to make sure showing like these other resources welcome their feedback. Maybe like maybe super spicy. Yeah. I was like, I don't know, but I think we definitely need more time on the first. Oh yeah. Yeah, but power is a little bit.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So I had to go back and changes to it, and then now 2 days ago I presented them the API. And well, I haven't heard back yet, but the conversation was about the fact that most of the implementation turns out that maybe I was 20%, 20 degrees off the right direction that I had to change. But having had the conversation earlier, I could have just I was doing the right thing. I was trying to create an API that I thought was the syncretic API. It turns out that it wasn't the actual API that they needed or wanted.
I was going to say lack thereof.
Okay, how are people feeling? Do we have an example someone would like to share from the groups that we were talking about that made a lot of sense for us to learn from?
Okay. Well, I was talking about how a lot of the times when I'm trying to make a point, I'll convey my thought by saying, I feel like all of these data points are really important. And while I'm trying to make these data things the central part of my argument, the words that I'm using really convey that it's more of an affect-driven argument because I'm saying I feel like this is the case, or I feel like these data points are important, but really it's based off of a feeling that I have rather than the data points that I'm bringing. I think that it's more of the central part of the argument. It's not about like everything that's used because of course in any good argument you're going to have data points and you're going to have emotion and you're going to be arguing for some semblance of completion, but really the central part of the argument in that case is like I feel like all of these other things combined mean something.
Getting the domain that he needs back. So maybe what he's communicating is, I need connection to this, and what he's getting back is data. Well, that doesn't feel good. If you want to feel good, for example, and what you're getting back is just facts, like maybe that would be going to satisfy.
I would add that maybe he has the data to argument like using feeling, but he doesn't know it because he doesn't track it or he doesn't observe it. So maybe that's what makes his statement like truthful and valid to fit into the effect. But the data maybe is there, but he just doesn't know that it's there and acts more like a feeling. Like I feel like this is good or this will help.
Also there may be data points that we just don't look at because of conversation. We already have our minds made up, and any data that doesn't agree with it, we kind of tend to throw that away. And authors do that at some point. So.
There's maybe like maybe we know some data, but I tend to assume that I don't know everything, of course. So when you work in the affect part, it opens the conversation more to like, here's how I feel, data point, data point, data point, but feel free to add and contribute to the conversation, however.
And feeling is a data point, right? Also, I think, in my opinion. We don't have just a ton of time, so we're going to go through some others before.
Yeah, so the last part of this model, so the whole, what we've been talking about is sort of David Kanter's model of models, which is, I think, very appropriate for programmers. He was just trying to imagine like what a framework looked like for us to be able to think about all of these systems of people. And so the last component to this, we have actions, we have domains, is the systems model. So it's these systems that we're operating within that color, you know, the roles that we're operating in, how the outcome can end up being or the effect. And so some good examples of this, I think, with the open model is open source projects. So it's sort of, I like to think about this like how many rules, right? Like how are people responding, like how flexible they are. Like open may have rules, but the idea is that they're supposed to help empower people to collaborate. In a closed system, very strict. It may be open source, but it's very rules based. And may be prioritized above the individual. And then you've got random, which at its best in a random system, you can have people, it requires people to self-regulate. If you have a group of people who do self-regulate, then you're still going to have some flexibility. But yeah, I mean, it's things like politics. No comment on that right now. Okay. But so something that's really interesting to get to see here that we can, well, let's actually, I'm going to move back because I think to cover what we've already talked about, if you think about what do these look like in these different systems settings? Like, what does everyone trying to move in a different direction look like in an open system where, like in an open source project, there's some governance. There's some rules that you can go by. So maybe this can't actually happen forever because there's rules that people can go to say like, hey, we want to try and get things done. Like this isn't the way that we do things. But what happens with this in a closed system with tons of rules? Are they going to follow the rules and sacrifice that above all else and all of these individuals trying to get what they want? What happens in a random system? Nothing ever gets accomplished potentially because they all have the ability to go in different directions and live their bliss. So, you're maybe never getting consensus on anything, and depending on where you're at, that's fine. So the systems end up really helping, I think, provide more context on like your real world, and domains help us approach what lens people are, perceiving things through in order for us to be able to communicate better. Let's see. So yeah, we have some, examples here of how the systems model can be functional or dysfunctional in each of these settings, because this isn't necessarily saying like closed military as an example, or these very like rules-based systems sound really awful, I think, in that because they sound very negative and imposing. But there's times where you can actually end up getting an advantage from that, such as quick decisions, right? I really appreciate being in open systems, but that can also be very exhausting when people are having a hard time coming to decisions because you really are trying to include everyone when circumstances may not be the appropriate path to getting something accomplished.
I was just going to ask, looking at these systems, can you identify in your mind what kind of system your organization is? Yeah. And, I'll speak from my past experience. I've worked in a random system that I thought that espoused open system values, and that's there's a disconnect there. So there was a lot of tension that resulted in people who have a preference for working in an open system who actually work in a random system. There have been lots of folks who prefer open, but then work in closed, and so it feels very like top down and kind of command and control in a way that doesn't give people insight and decision making. So then maybe that's not satisfactory. So I might ask you guys to think about your system preferences, because none of these things that we've talked about today are pejorative. They're not bad. If you prefer a closed system, great. That's totally fine. You'll probably be happier when you're working with other people who also are on the same page about that. So I know that those three models are a bit more complicated than just a definition like the Lasswell, but I'd love for you to think about how you can use the domains, use the actions, and use the systems to diagnose your conversations maybe in real time. Or if you just want to practice, start listening to conversations on your team and start identifying, oh, Joe, he's usually a mover in affect, and I notice he's having a lot of problems communicating with Susan, who is, an opposer in power. Maybe there's something we can do to fix the system there. Some resources we'd love to share with you for further reading if you want to dig more deeply into this. As Tracy mentioned, Reading the Room by David Kanter is very thorough on the model. And it's lots of examples from silly boardroom conversations that you can really laugh at, but it is quite helpful. The nonviolent communication technique was a pattern that I was going to just intro really quickly if we had time, but I think we're out of time. And then the CEO of Red Hat, Jim Whitehurst, wrote a book maybe 2 years ago called The Open Organization that kind of talks about systems inside an organization. But I just, and Tracy does too, love to geek out on this stuff. And so if you want to talk about communication, other techniques, share stories or advice or whatever, I'd love to chat more with you. And Tracy's the same way, but I think we have to end.
Yeah, I think we have to wrap it up. I will say, if you're able to come to Collaboration Summit tomorrow and Saturday, we will have some conversations around moderation. And if you're not able to come to that, there's an opportunity to potentially sign up for conflict management training. And conflict management is not the same as the communication techniques that we've learned today. But the techniques that we've learned here and those perspectives are required in order for you to be able to facilitate or better understand conflict management as well. And it's all about communication ultimately. So feel free to hit me up as well if you'd be interested in something like that and you're not going to be at Collaboration Summit. So, yeah.
Thank you all so much for
Thank you.
coming and participating. Really, it was a lot of fun.